Sup folks, let's talk about some tips and techniques for effective code generation using AI. All right folks, in this video, I want to talk about some effective strategies for writing code with AI. So we're going to talk about breaking down big projects, how to use predictive strategies, how to manage context, how to do what I like to call continuous validation, some learning techniques, and then some other stuff. So let's get started. So the first one is I wanted to build this Next.js app, right? And I'm not really familiarized. I'm not a software developer, so I'm not really familiarized with the stack, right? So React, Next.js, and Tailwind CSS, all those things were relatively new to me. And what I wanted to do was a simple yet complex app where you essentially do a quiz over contents of a video. And in the answers of the quiz, you could validate by clicking on a timestamp and going directly to that video part where you can find the answer for the question, right? So that I could interactively and dynamically move between parts of the video, quizzing myself on the content, which is something you can use for studying, etc., right? But it is a big project and it involved a lot of knowledge about use state, React hooks, components, manage state management, server-side logic, etc., etc., etc. And that complexity felt a little bit overwhelming. So what I did was I prompted ChatGPT 01 preview, which has amazing reasoning capabilities. Check out my video. I'll leave a link in the description. And what I asked was, I gave it some context about the project, so a description about what I wanted to do. And I said, break this project down into 4 mini projects that touch upon all the concepts of this bigger project in a pedagogical way for me to build up the skills for the bigger project. Meaning, do a breakdown that should describe the challenge, give some basic instructions to get started, but don't provide any answers, right? Don't give me the code right away. Just give me that scaffolding, right? The skeleton for me to start. And the study case I want to do is with this video quiz app. So essentially, the breakdown that I got from the model was, okay, so we're going to build first just a basic video playback. All right. So I went ahead and I did that. I learned a little bit about how to do a little component for the upload of the video, etc. And then I was like, okay, great. What's the next challenge? The next challenge was, well, now let's add transcriptions with the OpenAI API. So I had to update the button so that would handle the upload of the video plus the transcription using the OpenAI API. So that involved also implementing some server-side logic, API endpoints in Next.js, and understand a little bit of the routes. It got a little bit more clear at this point. And I was like, okay, let's go to the next one. So the next one was, okay, let's now make the timestamp, the transcriptions you generated. Let's add the timestamps, right? So that involved some changes in the server-side logic so that the OpenAI call to the Whisper model for the transcription would return actually the output with the timestamps, which involved also changing a little bit how that was being processed, both on the server side and on the front end, and then making them clickable. So it involved a little bit about understanding use state and state management, etc. Right? And I with this iterative approach using the cursor editor, which I've been using a lot lately, I was able to get this going. And just reflect here, folks, that I wasn't just blindly asking AI for components and just pasting them there. I was trying to work a little bit more like in small steps and understand what the process was all about. And we're going to discuss some strategies down the line that they're going to touch upon how I came to do this. Okay, so I got here and I was really happy. So, okay, what's the 4th final challenge? Well, now let's do our quiz over clickable transcriptions. So this is what I got in the end. I could see the video on top, right? I had a little button for generating the transcriptions and then a little button that would show the transcription if I wanted to. So it would toggle them on and off so that they would appear. I had a little button for generation of the quiz to ask me questions about the video I was going to watch, right? And then on the bottom, the logic for the quiz, which I decided to put it all into one frame because, don't have that much experience. This was going to be a simple app and I just wanted to see if this would work. And actually did. It was amazing. Obviously, I use Cursor and AI to generate some of the statics of the stuff and the components, etc. But I went gradually building up the experience and the knowledge. And at the end, when I would get the answer, I don't know if you can see it down here, but you have clickable timestamps that I could navigate the video with, which I thought was like so cool. This was such a fun project to do. So the first thing I would say is, yes, break down big projects into small projects, especially for when you don't know really about a specific programming language. I don't really believe in just copy pasting slop out of large language models, because I think that the cool idea is to have some sort of middle ground between not having to write everything yourself, but at the same time having a way to collaborate and gradually progress with an AI model to generate some useful code. All right. So second tip would be, folks, always have a prediction. What does that mean? It means that when you're writing some code and you want to use AI to generate something, and I'm not talking about completions, just simple completions. I'm talking about when, for example, if I open up the cursor here, right, and I come over here and I generate a new file, and let's say I call this file call NASA API.py, right? What I mean is when I come over here and I say, okay, write a Python script to call the NASA API and fetch the latest image of the day, right? When I write a script like this, and ideally, I want to have a prediction of what the structure is going to involve, right? It's probably going to use the requests package. It's going to make some call to this API. So it's going to have a URL referring to the API. So this kind of stuff that we're seeing here, right? So now when I accept this prediction, I would like to have some structure and understand at least these big components that we see highlighted here under comments. Because what we want is to be able to navigate this and have some understanding of what's going on. So for example, if I see something like, okay, this handling of the response, and maybe I don't know what that means, right? So that wasn't in my prediction. So I can do some comparison and contrast with what was generated. And from there, I can query the model again and try to get a little bit more understanding of these big parts without really getting concerned about the syntax or about what's being written per se, but about the bigger chunks, patterns, etc. All right. So going back to the presentation. So it's all about anticipating the response from the AI, right? And beyond that, one tip that I really find useful is when you're working on a big source code, on a big code base, or for example, I've been building a lot of like Next.js React apps, right? And there's a lot of files going on in a project like this, right? It's like really, before I was more used to like Python projects, they're really simple, much easier to handle. And one of the things I find extremely useful is to be able to predict which files will change when I ask for something like a big component, et cetera, right? I know that we can talk about things like, okay, but you can just use something like shadcn and add a component and all these things. But since I'm not an expert in software development, I don't want to get into this discussion. What I want to discuss is like, what is an effective way to collaborate with AI when you don't have a lot of experience in some programming language, but you want to build something there. You want to start there somewhere and just get a few principles and strategies and techniques for that, okay? So anticipate the response, always have a prediction, predict which files will change. Also compare your expectations, right, with the output so that you can do some comparison and then from there build up your own understanding of what should be written, etc., etc. I think that this is really cool because it highlights the discrepancies between what you thought was going to be written and what actually got written in the end. All right. Now, the next one is add only the necessary files for context. Now, folks, to demonstrate what I mean with this, let me just go back one. Yeah, to demonstrate what I mean with this, I'm gonna navigate here to my cursor editor again. I'm actually gonna go to terminal and I'm gonna open up a project here. All right. So this project that we're gonna take a look is gonna be, I'm gonna do my storyboard project. Okay, storyboard app, and I'm gonna go cursor. What this project is all about is a simple app, which I can actually demonstrate here real quick. If I go here, we can actually take a look, npm run dev. And then if I run open localhost, it's a very simple UI that essentially allows you to create a little storyboard, with image generation using DALL-E 3 in the backend. So I can describe a story and it will populate these frames with the aspects of that story. So like a bear went into the woods and found some honey, all right? And I can say the story, I can say graphic novel, right? And then I can click on generate the story. So it's gonna be calling the API a couple of times. And then it's going to be fetching the images that make sense to compose the story into 3 frames because that's what I've asked. Okay, so this is the simple app that we have here in front of us. This is another simple project that I use to practice my web development skills, which as you can see are not very super well developed, but I'll get there, right? I'll get there. However, what I think it's cool, there you go. As you can see, it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty nice. But my point is, we're getting sidetracked over here. So my point is, when I want to make a change to an app like this, right? Let's say that imagine that I wanted to do a change to this, the color of this button, right? To the color of the button that has add frames, right? So I can go and find where that button is, right? It's in the page on click, and then page index. So there you go. So we have here the button, right? If the change I want to make is local, right? I just want to change this name of this button. I really don't need, for example, to use information from any other file but this page.tsx file, right? So I can come here and say, giving only the page.tsx file as context for the generation using Cursor, which if you're not familiar, it's the editor that I'm showing right now. And I can say, change the color of the add frames button to red. Okay, and I can click enter, and it's going to use only the information from that page.tsx file to try to produce those modifications that I asked, right? And what's cool about Cursor is this very neat feature where when you create a generation, you can click on apply, and it will apply it specifically to the region of the document. You can click on accept. I can save this, and we can visualize the changes there. And as you can see, folks, the button now is red. However, what I could have done is if I had asked the same thing. Let's say now that I want to change the color of the button to green, right? I could say something like add change the color of the add frames button to green. However, this time I'm going to click Control Enter on my Mac. And what's going to happen is that it's going to use all of the files from the code base as context to give an answer that really doesn't need to know about the rest, right? So I can click on Control Enter. And now, folks, what you're going to see is that the model is using all of these files, right? And remember, folks, this is some model that's using a paid API on the back end. So if you're paying for this in the back end of the API, that's on you and that's unnecessary. And you increase the chance to create something that's actually not ideal, right, folks? That's not what you want. It can hallucinate. It can do some things that don't make sense. Let's say if in this case it worked. It's probably going to work because it was a simple problem to give to the model, to give to this specific context. So I'm going to save it. I said green. So let's see if it's green. All right, it's green. So it wasn't that much of a big deal. However, it's always advisable to only use the files and the context that's needed for the model to solve your problem. When you don't know what the files are, then you can do, for example, a meta query first, where you can try to assess what are the parts involved in this problem that I have that I don't really know how to solve. And then from that conversation, you can then follow up to say, okay, so then use this file's context, try to solve the problem, etc., etc. Okay, so hopefully that point passed across. Add only the necessary files for context, okay? Now, the other point I want to make for effective AI code generation is cross-check and validate the reasoning of the model constantly, okay? So what does that mean? It means you have to build intuition about the model's behavior, right? You learn to build intuition about what problems are too big for the model to handle, what problems need more context, what kind of problems can lead to reasoning that's faulty or incoherences or hallucinations, etc., etc., etc. All right. Oh, so for for that to work effectively, folks, what I advise you to do is to work in small, verifiable increments, all right? And I usually prefer, actually, it's not necessarily true. I don't necessarily prefer single line changes over whole files because that can be quite long. And if you're just going to be doing predictions, that's not necessarily long. What I would say is I prefer changes across small chunks that are usually less than the size of a file, than to be modifying files left and right and lose a little bit of lose track of what's happening, how these changes are modifying the process of my app, etc., etc. Okay, because that reduces the risk of introducing errors into your application as you collaborate with AI effectively. All right, so imagine that we're here, we're making these changes, and we, just as in the example with the smaller projects and challenges to build up the skills to get to that bigger project, I find it very useful and interesting and much more effective to work in small verifiable increments rather than work in try to make huge modifications at once, right? Not necessarily single line changes. I think that I was exaggerating here when I took these notes, but chunks and patterns that are really less than a file so that you can understand the modifications, how they change the overall state, and you can keep track of stuff, all right? Now, this is going to be kind of unintuitive, I think, for some people. And folks, this is not necessarily something that I think it's absolute imperative. However, I do find it quite useful when I don't know how to program in a language, but I'm using AI to kind of help me get started, to start by copying code by hand at the beginning. What does that mean? Instead of just doing this frenetic copy pasting, even if you're using something as advanced as Cursor that does all the copy pasting for you, and you're just like, acting as a supervisor of big chunks of code, I find it extremely useful to build intuition about a project, to copy code by hand at the very beginning. All right, because that not only builds muscle memory for what's going on, but it helps me gather that initial beginner-like intuition. It helped me a lot to understand a little bit more about state management in React and about server-side logic, front end, and a lot of stuff in web development. I'm definitely not an expert at all. My background is in AI engineering. However, it's been amazing because of how quickly now and how fast and how simple it is to build apps. It's just extremely fun to do these little projects. And I think that this can be a tip for all of you that not only want to create apps, but also want to understand what's going on as you learn how to code in different languages. All right, folks. Now, this one is a really personal dear to me, which is about creating Anki flashcards. Now, I've used Anki flashcards for many years now. And the first time I actually came across Anki flashcards was when I read an article by a guy called Michael Newson. It's called Augmenting Long-Term Memory, folks, which I so recommend all of you to take a look. I mean, this guy right here, Michael Newson, is a goat, genius, awesome, has amazing content out there about interactive technologies and so many articles that I could do like 10 videos on Michael Newson and it would not be enough, right, folks? And in this particular article that really just had an effect on me, he discusses this idea of using space repetition systems, which Anki is just a software that implements a space repetition algorithm on top of some flashcards that you create to study and memorize different pieces of information. But he discusses this theory and framework for using Anki as a way to make memory a deliberate process, something that you can decide that you're going to remember in your life, and then use it and just review your cards 20 minutes a day. And then this defines all the strategies and the rules and a bunch of stuff. So I definitely recommend, folks. I think I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna remember to put this on the link in the description because I definitely recommend you check this out. Okay, folks. So, but what's the point here? The point is that as we are programming, writing code and stuff, what I realize is that if I do too much code generation with AI and I don't really pay attention to what is going on, what I mean is if I don't really pay attention to what's being generated and I'm just like asking the model and just pasting the error, etc., I don't build understanding that progressively improves my ability to write better and better code. So what I started to do is I started to use Anki flashcards as I am working with AI to write some app, etc., to Ankify, which is the process of creating a flashcard. All of the pieces of information, they're kind of absolutely like all of the gaps in all of the details that I don't know, all of the things that kind of like sit in those blanks or gaps in memory or things that I don't understand, concepts, etc., right? And I have a series of automations that I use to do that, which actually also use AI, but that's a subject for another video. However, I definitely recommend that if you want to learn about the languages you're using and etc., I definitely recommend you check out how to create Anki flashcards. It's a really cool process, all right? Because it reinforces learning as you code, and you can, as you're writing code, if you don't know the answer or if it's a complex answer, you can create questions to answer later, which I find extremely useful as well. I just create a kind of flashcards in Anki without a response. And then when I review them in my daily reviews, I know that I have to provide an answer. So I have a conversation with maybe ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, or I Google it, etc., find out the answer, and then now I'll know it forever. And it's important that when I say create Anki flashcards here, folks, I don't mean interrupt your flow when you're coding, right? So find a way to be able to encode in the moment or leave it for later. So note down your queries so that you don't interrupt your flow, but at the same time, you make sure that those pieces of information that you don't have or you don't know or you don't understand will be, dealt with later, all right? So that's what I would say. All right, folks. Next is leverage AI self-reflection. Now, folks, I don't know which of you know about this paper, but I'm going to just I'm just going to open it up. LM self-reflection paper PDF. So a really interesting paper came out. There's actually a bunch that explore this technique about self-reflection, right? And essentially they showed that the models had amazing performance in problem solving if you instruct them to self-reflect on the stuff that they're doing. Okay, so using these guidance, each self-reflecting agent attempted to re-answer questions. Our results indicate that agents are able to significantly improve their problem-solving performance through self-reflection, with a p-value considerably smaller than 0.005, which is usually the threshold for statistical significance. And yes, so it's essentially a technique that we can leverage in a more simplified way, where we ask the model to either justify its decision or to reflect on the output that it generated, okay? Because what's going to happen is, as you create code with AI, if you don't want to learn about anything, if you don't understand what's going on and you just want to have a bunch of pasty code there that you hopefully works and does what you want, that's one thing, that's fine. However, if you want to have a system of collaborating with AI where even when you don't have the absolute expertise on a specific programming language, you still want to have understanding of the overall concepts and what's going on, the flow of your code, etc., etc. I definitely advise you for when you're dealing with problems that are a little bit like beyond what you know, and you have no prediction for what the answer should be, or maybe the output of the model is not really getting where you want to get. If you ask the model to self-reflect on what it did and explain its outputs, you're going to get amazing performance, right? Sometimes you have to provide a little bit of context and then ask the model, explain your output, all right? And that's all you got to do. Now, another one, folks, is about visualization documentation tools. Now, one thing I really like when I'm, for example, in Cursor here, working on some specific code base, is to create overall views of the code base as it increases and it gets bigger and bigger because we add more components and we add more functionalities and more state management and et cetera, et cetera. So what I do is I ask Cursor, because Cursor has this really cool ability to access all the files for the code base. So then you can generate a mermaid graph, a mermaid diagram of that entire code base. Let's do that for the storyboard app, okay? So I'm going to say generate a mermaid graph diagram of this entire code base and outlining the most important aspects of the code flow, something like that, right? It's the prompt here doesn't really matter because this is a relatively simple problem, right? So I can press enter. And then what's going to happen is the model is going to, oh, let's wait just 1 second. Let's do that again. And let's make sure that it uses the entire code base. Okay. So now it's using all, it's reading up all, so it's aware of all the files that are there, because we want to make sure that the model is aware of the overall file structure and the content of each file, et cetera, et cetera. And now it generates this very nice mermaid graph that we can inspect. So I'm gonna just copy this, all right, folks? And there are many ways that we can use to visualize this. The one that I'm gonna choose is I'm gonna paste this thing here, and I'm gonna say, actually, I'm gonna just generate this in Obsidian. So I'm just gonna create something like mermaid graph. I'm gonna come over here. I'm gonna say mermaid, all right? And now I'm gonna do over here, and it had an error. Of course it did. So export OpenAI, it had some error, OpenAI API. So let's see if I generate like this. So let's see, sometimes we got to do a little bit of debugging. All right, folks, so let's try to make this a little bit better. I'm going to come over here to cursor. I'm going to say Control Shift, Control L. I'm going to say create a mermaid diagram of this code base. Let's try something more simple. And then let's also give the entire code base as a context for the model to generate. Let's see if this time it generates a better performing diagram. So let's take a look. Diagram shows this, this, and that. Okay, so we're going to copy that. So I'm going to put it here so that everyone can see. So let's see if it works. There you go, folks. And now we get a very nice diagram of all of our source code, which is really cool. So we can see that the storyboard app has this pages folder, and then the styles, configuration, and the package.json, tsconfig, nextconfig, next.config.mjs, which describes, has all the configurations for everything that's like global in our app. And then you have the tailwind config.ts file, which is tailwind stuff, is usually for your utilities for CSS styling. And then your customized CSS goes into the global CSS file. And then we have the page.tsx file. And then we have some UI components like a card, an input, button, select. And then we have a frame editor. Beautiful, right? We have some API endpoints. Okay, folks, so it's really nice. And what you can do beyond that, if you want to have something that maybe you want to present, maybe you want to correct in case you identify the model didn't do something correctly, what you can do, a little hack that you can do is you can copy this, right? We can go over to ExcaliDraw. And ExcaliDraw right now has this feature that's in beta, which I think everyone has access to. And then you can click here on AI on the top right, and I can come over here to Mermaid to ExcaliDraw, and then I can just paste the code that was generated, and then I can click on Insert, and folks, what we get is an editable diagram with all of the stuff from our source code, which is awesome because now all of these are, editable. You have this diagram that's alive, and you can even set up systems to, make this even more interesting and fun. However, what I like about this is that it gives me an overall view of what's going on in the app. I can share this. Now it's easy to perhaps edit together with someone, etc., etc. So definitely something that I like to do, and that I think it's a good tip to keep in mind. All right, folks. So create overall views as diagrams, especially as your your code base increases, because it will definitely help you out. So you generate diagrams, source code structure, and then you turn these graphs into editable diagrams. I just showed you an example live, but I also have an image here on how to do that, how I did that for a previous project for the transcription stuff that we were talking about in the beginning. So it's pretty cool. All right. Next, folks, is reuse with AI. This is kind of, I think every single software books like The Amazing, The Pragmatic Programmer, and so many other software books talk about the importance of reusing stuff instead of redoing stuff, right? When I say reuse with AI, what I mean here is use AI to create reusable code snippets. This has been quite a fun, interesting approach with me, which is when you don't know a language very well, it's hard to create useful snippets, because snippets, what I mean is just small pieces of code that you're going to reuse many times later in your other projects, right? But when you don't have a lot of experience in a specific language, you don't know which snippets are going to be useful. So you kind of like save everything, don't save everything. You kind of just go recycling old code all the time. So it's hard to get a sense for how to create these atomic, useful, reusable chunks of code. However, AI does know a lot of programming languages, right? So you can use it to create reusable code snippets. And I usually do this after every useful and productive coding session because I find it quite useful to constantly be finding ways to be, faster and more productive by identifying which parts of the code are going to be reusable. And then before we go into the next part, folks, what I want to show you just an example. For example, here, let's say that, I don't know, maybe this handle export PDF is a piece of code that I want to reuse, right? Not necessarily true, but maybe this is something very general that I want to reuse. What I would do is I would hit Control-Shift-P, and then I would write snippet, and then I would say configure user snippet, and then I would go down here to my code snippets for React components. There's not that much stuff here right now. And then I would, in Cursor, I can paste this, and then I can say something like Control-K, and then I can say, convert this into a VS Code snippet with the prefix handle PDF export, something like that, right? I can hit submit. And now what's going to happen is the AI Cursor just did that for me. I'm going to say accept. And now, folks, what you have is a snippet that's reusable, right? And I'm going to save this. And now, folks, if I do Control N and I'm in another file and I say handle, there's the snippet for reuse right there, folks. And it was created seamlessly, super fast, super quickly. So it's definitely a useful tip for you to keep in mind. All right. So that's one that I really like. Another one, and this is something that I really love using in this Cursor AI editor that I've been discussing with you folks. And it's not sponsored. This video is not sponsored by Cursor, right, folks? I wish. So this is just, I really like the editor. A lot of people like it because it has a lot of amazing, useful features. And that's why we're talking about it today. But one of the features that I really like is the docs feature, folks, which is a way for you to provide context for the model by giving the model a link to the documentation for some API or some code base that you want the model to be aware of, perhaps because it's there's some recent change in an API, etc., and you want the model to be aware of that. And the docs feature is amazing. So I'll demonstrate how that works. So I think I have no, I don't. So let's just, I can come over here in this page.tsx. I can open up the chat interface here on the right. And what I can do, folks, is that if I do @docs, I can access all the documentation that I have stored here, right? So imagine I could click on the OpenAI Whisper Transcribe, which is the documentation only for the transcriptions with the OpenAI API. And I could say something like, I don't know, I could come here and I could write a prompt to integrate into this page something with the OpenAI Whisper transcription. I'm not going to do that right now, but it's something for you to be aware. However, folks, if you're not using Cursor, there are like many different ways that you can do that. What I advise you to do is always try for modern code bases to have an awareness if the model is going to have that in its training set, because the cutoff points for different models, like for example, for the Claude 3.5 Sonnet, for GPT-4o, it's probably 2023, maybe earlier this year. I'm not 100% sure, folks. However, doesn't matter. The point is providing documentation information to the model as context is key. And it's cool that this editor makes that super easy for us to do. Okay. So folks, as discussed, effective AI-assisted coding involves breaking down projects into smaller challenges to get you motivated to do it and to grow the skills for bigger projects. You got to always have a prediction about stuff. It's important to manage context and be able to manage complexity as your project grows. So you can do things like always have an overview of the code that you have, do modifications to the code in small verifiable chunks instead of doing like a bunch of whole file copy pastes that you don't really understand what's going on. Use Anki flashcards and learn to craft good questions and organize your prompts properly. Leverage tools and techniques, like for example, leverage tools like the docs feature in Cursor, or use context effectively by only giving the model the files that it needs to solve the problem that you're having. And that's it, folks. Stay engaged and proactive. Always understand and verify the AI outputs. And I'm really interested in what are the effective collaboration paradigms between humans and AI so that we can tackle perhaps multiple programming languages. So I want to learn multiple languages and multiple programming languages. And what is the right way to work with AI so that I can actually learn them as I use AI to do stuff with them. Okay. And that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time. Cheers.